The rain had started earlier than the forecast had promised, tapping against the window in erratic rhythms that sounded almost like whispers. Esraa sat curled up on the living room sofa, the warm glow of the table lamp casting an amber halo around her. The rest of the house was dim, shadows stretching long and deep across the walls. Outside, the wind pushed sheets of rain sideways, bending the trees in the yard into uneasy shapes. Every so often, a gust would rattle the window panes, making her glance up from her book just to be sure it was only the storm. Her parents were gone for the night, away at a late dinner party, leaving her with the kind of solitude she usually enjoyed. Except tonight, it felt different. The electricity flickered once, twice before holding steady. She told herself it was just the storm toying with the power lines. But her mind kept replaying the countless horror stories she'd heard about things that happen when the lights go out. She shifted in her seat, trying to focus on the pages in her hands, yet every distant creak of the house seemed magnified. The familiar structure, one she had lived in for years, now seemed to be breathing, groaning and settling like it had its own quiet consciousness. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, as if it could shield her from that creeping awareness in the kitchen. The old refrigerator hummed, a sound she was so used to she almost never noticed it. But when it stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, hollow silence, her ears strained to catch anything else. Somewhere upstairs, she thought she heard the faintest shuffle, like a socked foot dragging across carpet. Her breath caught, heart skipping before she reasoned it away. Maybe the storm had made the wood expand, or maybe it was just the house adjusting. Still, she found herself glancing at the darkened hallway that led to the staircase, imagining the shadows moving just beyond her sight. She reached for her phone on the coffee table, checking the time, 9:14 p.m. The clock's steady numbers were a comfort, something definite in a night that felt increasingly uncertain. A text from her mother appeared. "Everything okay? We'll be home late. Don't wait up." Esraa typed back quickly, "All fine. Just reading." She hesitated before hitting send, considering adding something about the noises upstairs, but she knew it would sound silly. They'd just tell her it was her imagination, and maybe they'd be right. Maybe. Still, her eyes kept darting toward the hallway, each time expecting to see something at the top of the stairs. The storm outside seemed to grow heavier, the rain a constant hiss against the roof. And beneath that steady sound, she thought she heard it again. That slow, dragging shuffle from above. This time, she didn't reason it away so easily. Her book lay forgotten in her lap, her phone now clenched in her hand. The night, once calm and cozy, had begun to feel like it was leaning toward her, watching. Esraa sat motionless, ears straining for any sign that the noise had been real and not just a trick of her imagination. The rain's steady hiss filled the silence, but beneath it, there it was again. A faint thump, almost too soft to notice, followed by that same dragging sound. It seemed to move slowly from one side of the upstairs to the other, deliberate and unhurried, like whoever or whatever was up there wasn't worried about being heard. A cold shiver worked its way down her spine. She told herself it could be the wind rattling loose boards in the attic, but the steps sounded far too heavy for that. She rose from the sofa, blanket slipping to the floor, and stepped toward the hallway. The lamp's light faded quickly here, leaving the narrow passage dim and oppressive. The staircase at the end stood like a mouth into darkness, each step cloaked in shadow. She took a deep breath, trying to summon the courage to go upstairs and prove there was nothing to be afraid of. But the thought of seeing something she couldn't explain froze her in place. Her fingers tightened around her phone. She could call her parents, or maybe the police. But what would she even say? "I think I hear footsteps" wasn't exactly an emergency. Instead, she decided to listen more carefully. She stepped back into the living room, turned off the TV she hadn't even realized was still playing quietly, and stood in the middle of the room with every light source except the table lamp switched off. The house became a hollow shell of quiet. That was when she heard it again, clearer now, 3 slow, heavy steps, then a pause, then a faint scraping sound like fabric brushing against the wall. The sound stopped abruptly, as though whoever was making it realized she was listening. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She glanced toward the front door, considering just leaving the house altogether, but the thought of stepping into the storm and walking alone in the pitch-black street was somehow even worse. The idea of calling her neighbor crossed her mind, but she didn't want to seem paranoid. After all, she still wasn't sure she'd heard what she thought she had. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone upstairs was sure she had heard them. Then, just as she began to convince herself she could ignore it and wait for her parents to come home, a new sound reached her ears. A long, slow creak from the top step of the staircase. This time it wasn't distant. This time it was closer. Esraa's breath hitched, her eyes locked on the staircase. The creak she'd just heard seemed to linger in the air, as if the house itself were holding its breath with her. The shadows on the steps were deep, layered in gradients of black where the light couldn't reach. For a moment, nothing moved. She told herself it might have been the wood settling, but then, from the upper landing, she thought she saw the faintest shift. Just a small, wavering change in the darkness, like a shadow moving against other shadows. It was so quick she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it, but her heart didn't believe that. She took one step backward, careful not to make the floorboards squeak. Her eyes refused to leave that patch of darkness at the top of the stairs. The wind outside rose to a howl, the branches of the old maple slapping against the siding. For a heartbeat, the living room window flashed white as lightning lit up the yard, and in that instant, Esraa could have sworn she saw something on the landing. Not a clear figure, but a shape tall and thin, angled as though it were leaning out just enough to watch her. When the darkness fell back in, the landing was empty again, or maybe it had never been occupied at all. Her phone felt heavy in her palm. She quickly unlocked it, flicking to the camera app almost without thinking. She raised it toward the staircase and took a photo, the screen's brief light spilling into the hall. When she glanced at the picture, her stomach clenched. The photo was grainy, the shadows too deep to make out much, but there was a smudge of something pale near the edge of the frame. The shape could have been a trick of the lighting, or it could have been a face. She couldn't tell, and that uncertainty was worse than knowing. She lowered the phone slowly, ears pricked for any sound. This time, the noise didn't come from upstairs. Instead, there was a faint tap, like a single knuckle rapping against glass, from the back of the house. She turned her head sharply toward the kitchen, where the sliding glass door led to the rain-soaked yard. It was locked, she was sure of that, but she wasn't sure anymore that locks mattered. The silence after the tap was oppressive, almost louder than the sound itself. She stood frozen, halfway between the stairs and the kitchen, as the storm continued its relentless assault on the house. Somewhere deep inside, a creeping certainty began to settle over her. She was not alone, and whatever was in the house wasn't in a hurry. It was waiting. Esraa's gaze darted from the shadowed staircase to the dark outline of the kitchen. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more unnerving than the last. If there really was someone upstairs, then the sound at the sliding door might mean there were two intruders, or worse, that she was being surrounded. The house felt smaller now, every wall closing in, the air thick with dampness from the storm pressing against the windows. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, thudding so loudly she feared it would drown out the next noise. She took a cautious step toward the kitchen, phone clutched like a lifeline. The floor beneath her feet creaked faintly, and she flinched at how loud it seemed in the silence. As she reached the threshold of the kitchen, the dim glow from the living room failed to illuminate much beyond the counters. The sliding glass door was only a shadowy rectangle at the far end, rain streaking down its surface in erratic rivulets. She squinted, trying to see through the downpour. For a brief moment, lightning flared, and in that fraction of a second, she thought she saw a faint handprint on the glass. Pressed from the outside, her skin prickled as she stepped closer. The rain blurred everything beyond the glass into warped shapes, but she couldn't shake the feeling that one of those shapes was staying still, too still, just beyond the edge of the patio. Her phone's flashlight hovered over the door, the beam reflecting back at her in harsh white glare. She could see the condensation on the inside and, yes, the faint, distinct outline of fingers spread against the other side. The print looked fresh, the raindrops rolling around it rather than washing it away. Before she could move, a floorboard groaned loudly from upstairs. The sound came from directly above her, her bedroom. The realization struck like ice. Whoever was up there had moved closer to the center of the house. She was trapped between two unknowns, both far too close for comfort. Her eyes flicked back to the staircase, and she could swear the darkness at the top had shifted again. Though she refused to look too long, her throat felt dry, and her mind screamed at her to make a choice. Run out into the storm and risk whatever was outside, or stay in the house and face whatever was upstairs. The decision weighed on her like lead, but the night wasn't going to let her think for long. Somewhere behind her, a faint but deliberate sound broke through the rain. The quiet slide of glass against metal. The sound of the glass sliding against its track was unmistakable now. Esraa spun toward the door, her flashlight beam cutting through the rain-smeared surface. Her stomach lurched. One side of the sliding door had opened just a fraction, barely an inch, but enough to send a ribbon of cold, wet air spilling into the kitchen. The wind hissed through the gap, carrying with it the sharp scent of rain and earth. Her hand tightened around the phone until her knuckles whitened. Whoever was outside wasn't just watching anymore. They were trying to get in. She darted forward, heart hammering, and shoved the door shut, slamming the latch down hard. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen, but it didn't feel like victory. She stood there, staring at the glass, listening for movement on the other side. The storm roared, masking almost everything, but she thought she caught the faintest rasp, like fingertips dragging slowly across the glass surface. She stepped back, pulse thrumming, her legs trembling so badly she nearly stumbled. Then the house joined the assault. A heavy, deliberate thud shook the ceiling above her. Far too solid to be the wind. Her gaze shot upward toward the plaster, her mind mapping the sound directly to the location of her bedroom. The intruder upstairs had moved again, closer to the stairs, closer to her. The realization landed like ice water in her chest. Both threats were no longer idle. They were converging. She backed into the living room, the hallway to the stairs now a black tunnel on her left, the kitchen and its rain-smeared door on her right. The air felt electric, charged not just with the storm's energy but with something heavier, intentional. Her thoughts scrambled for escape plans, but every option seemed worse than the last. The front door was closer than the back, but it meant passing the staircase, and if something waited there. She couldn't finish the thought. Lightning flashed again, and for the briefest heartbeat, she saw it, at the top of the stairs. A figure, tall, lean, and motionless, its head tilted slightly as if listening. The darkness rushed back in before her eyes could drink in more detail, but the image burned into her mind, immovable. And in that same moment, from behind her, came the faint metallic click of the sliding door lock lifting. The metallic click of the sliding door lock sent a surge of raw instinct through Esraa. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She spun toward the front of the house, phone clutched tight, flashlight beam swinging wildly across the walls. Behind her, the door slid an inch, then another, the wet hiss of rain pouring into the kitchen like an open wound. She didn't wait to see who was coming through. She couldn't. She darted past the base of the staircase, forcing herself not to look up. But the wood above groaned. A step taken, slow and heavy, and she couldn't help it. Her eyes flicked upward just long enough to catch the faint outline of a foot disappearing back into the shadows. Whoever was upstairs wasn't retreating out of fear. They were moving deliberately, like they knew exactly how to hurt her. The front door loomed ahead, dark against the lighter walls. Her fingers scrambled over the lock, fumbling in her panic. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts, the sound too loud in the narrow entryway. At last, the lock clicked open, and she yanked the door toward her, only for the wind to slam it back against her. The storm roared in, soaking her within seconds, the rain stinging her skin like tiny needles. She stepped onto the porch, heart screaming for her to run into the night. But the instant she crossed the threshold, she froze. There was movement at the edge of the yard, something tall and unmoving one moment, gone the next as a flash of lightning fractured the sky. She squinted through the downpour, her stomach twisting with the realization that she'd seen it before, only from upstairs. The same lean, unnatural posture. If that figure was in the yard now, then who or what was upstairs? The answer didn't have time to form. Behind her, from inside the house, came a sharp, deliberate knock 3 raps. Against the wall near the open front door. She spun back, water dripping from her hair, the entryway behind her yawning like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. And just beyond that threshold, half hidden in shadow, stood another figure. This one was closer. The storm's roar seemed to fade under the thundering rush of her own heartbeat. Esraa took one shaky step backward into the house, her eyes fixed on the figure in the shadows of the entryway. It didn't move, not an inch, but there was something wrong. Its proportions weren't quite right. The shoulders seemed too narrow for its height, the neck too long, the head tilted at a strange, unnatural angle that made her stomach twist. The dim porch light barely grazed its surface, but she could see the pale gleam of skin stretched too tight over bone from outside. The other figure remained at the yard's edge, unmoving despite the sheets of rain lashing it. For a terrifying moment, Esraa felt caught in a triangle between them, unsure who would move first. Then the one inside tilted its head further, so far that it should have been impossible without something snapping, and began to step forward. The sound wasn't like a normal footstep. It was softer, dragging, as though the legs weren't bending at the knee. Her body screamed to run, but the path out the front door meant crossing dangerously close to the thing in the shadows. She turned instead toward the living room, heart hammering, and bolted down the narrow hall. The darkness seemed to swallow her as she passed the staircase, but she could hear it now. Footsteps above, quick and light, moving in sync with her own. Tracking her from overhead, she stumbled into the kitchen, intending to flee out the back, but the sliding door was wide open now. Curtains flapped in the wet wind, water pooling on the tiles. The outside figure was gone from the yard. She froze, scanning the storm-smeared darkness, but it was useless. Too many shifting shadows, too much movement from the rain. A sudden gust shoved the door further open, and with it came a sound so close she almost dropped her phone. Slow breathing, deep and steady, coming from just beyond the door frame. Her skin prickled, every instinct telling her to slam the door shut. But before she could move, something pale slid into view. A hand, long skeletal fingers tipped with nails that looked almost black, gripped the edge of the frame. And then, just barely, a face leaned in, not human, not right, eyes too wide, too unblinking, catching the kitchen light in a way that made them gleam like wet glass. The sight of that face snapped something in Esraa. She stumbled back, nearly slipping on the wet tile, as the pale hand began to curl tighter around the door frame. The creature didn't rush. It leaned further inside, its unblinking eyes locked on her, as if savoring her fear. Behind her, a faint shuffle on the hardwood floor sent chills tearing up her spine. The other one, the one from the entryway, was no longer standing still. She bolted toward the hallway, the storm's roar following her through the open glass door. Her shoes slapped against the floor, water trailing from her soaked clothes, but she didn't dare look back. From upstairs, a new set of footsteps joined the chaos. Faster, lighter, and directly above her, moving toward the staircase. They were coordinating. Esraa skidded into the living room, the lamp still glowing weakly on the side table. The shadows swelled and shifted in the corners, and before she could reach the front door, the tall figure stepped out from behind the wall, blocking the way. Its movements were jerky, as though it didn't quite understand how joints were supposed to work. That awful, tilted head swiveled toward her in a way no human neck should. She pivoted hard and ran for the stairs, thinking, hoping she could make it to her room and lock the door. But halfway up, she froze. At the top, standing perfectly still, was the third one. Its skin was as pale as the others, but its mouth was stretched impossibly wide, frozen in what looked like a smile. The air between them felt heavy, as if the house itself were holding her in place. Panic ripped through her. She turned and barreled back down the stairs, slamming into the tall figure at the bottom. Its body was ice cold and harder than she expected, but it staggered back just enough for her to shove past. She ran for the kitchen, heart pounding, and grabbed the heavy wooden bar stool from under the counter. With all her strength, she slammed it against the sliding door, forcing it closed and wedging the stool in place. The latch was useless now, but at least it was something. Still, she could hear it, that slow, patient breathing, just on the other side of the glass. The stool rattled under the pressure from outside. Something heavy pressed against the sliding glass door, slow but steady, testing the barrier. Each push made the wood groan and the glass shiver. Esraa gripped the edge of the counter, breath coming in ragged bursts. She could hear them inside now, too soft, measured footsteps moving across the living room floor. The sound was wrong. It wasn't just walking. It was pacing, circling, like they were drawing her deeper into the house. From upstairs came a new noise. 3 slow, deliberate thumps, evenly spaced, each one vibrating through the floorboards. She could picture that grinning one at the top of the stairs, its head cocked, listening. The others seemed to be moving with purpose now, as if some silent signal had been given. Her pulse spiked. The kitchen was a trap. If the door gave way, she'd have nowhere to run. Her eyes darted to the small pantry door near the fridge. It wasn't much of a hiding spot, but it might buy her a few seconds. She lunged toward it, yanked it open, and slipped inside, pulling it shut behind her. The space was cramped, the air stale, filled with the scent of dry goods and cardboard. She crouched low, clutching her phone to her chest, every nerve straining to pick out sounds over the storm that didn't take long. The bar stool scraped violently across the tile as the sliding door finally gave. The wind howled in, followed by that same slow breathing, closer now, deliberate. Another set of footsteps answered from the living room, and then, silence. It was worse than the noise. She knew they were in the house now. She just didn't know where. A faint click echoed right outside the pantry. The knob turned once, twice, then stopped. Esraa held her breath, pressing her back against the shelves, willing herself to be invisible. But then came the sound that shattered any hope she had left. A low, guttural laugh, drawn out and broken, like someone trying to mimic a sound they'd never made before. And it wasn't coming from one place. It was coming from two directions at once. The laughter scraped at Esraa's mind, wrong in a way she couldn't put into words. It came closer, overlapping, as though the walls themselves were echoing it back at her. She gripped the pantry door handle, knuckles white, knowing the moment they opened it, she'd be done. Her breath was shallow, her chest aching from holding it in. The knob turned again. Slow this time, deliberate. That was her moment. Esraa threw her shoulder into the door, slamming it outward with all her weight. The impact sent one of the figures stumbling back, its two long limbs flailing. She didn't stop to see if it fell. She was already sprinting for the front door, bare feet slapping against the wet floor. The storm howled through the open back of the house, wind slamming cupboards and rattling picture frames as if the whole place were alive. Halfway through the living room, the tall figure from the staircase stepped into her path, head tilting to watch her approach. Its mouth began to open, slow and wide, but she didn't slow down. With a burst of adrenaline, she slammed into it, the impact like running into ice. It staggered just enough for her to slip past, fingers grazing her shoulder with a grip so cold it burned. The front door was there, open, swinging wildly in the wind. She dove through it into the storm, the rain instantly blinding her. Her bare feet slapped against the porch, then the wet driveway. Lightning flashed, and for a split second she saw them, all three, standing in the doorway watching. None of them chased her. They just stood there, silhouettes against the dim light inside, heads tilting in eerie unison. Esraa didn't stop running. She didn't stop when she reached the street, or when the glow of her neighbor's porch came into view. Even after she pounded on their door and collapsed into their hallway, gasping and sobbing, she couldn't shake the image burned into her mind. Three still shapes framed in the glow of her own home, standing like they belonged there.